Welcome to our Latina Lens podcast, where we elevate the work and stories of Latina and Latine photographers in the U.S. Last episode, we heard from Mabel Jiménez, a photojournalist whose career has been focusing on documenting the stories of the people of the Mission neighborhood in San Francisco. She now mentors visual journalists at community media outlets throughout California through her work at Catchlight. If you haven't heard it yet, make sure to go back to episode 2 and listen to her story. Today's episode is a little bit different. Each of the photographers that I interview will also be taking us behind the scenes to their experience and the context of their most significant images. If you want to see the images that we're talking about today, go ahead and click on the link in your show notes and it'll take you to our website or go to ourlatinalens.com. The images will be included in the descriptions for each episode. Mabel's first image is about transition and loss. She photographed the farewell celebration and removal of a beloved community mural in the Mission neighborhood, and she shares some of the economic and social forces that brought this moment into being and how the community reacted.
When I first moved to San Francisco and I stumbled upon the Mission, I really felt at home. This is a little Mexico neighborhood. It has the best food, best weather in the city, no contest. It's got a really vibrant art scene, activism scene, poetry. Like there's just so much exciting stuff that happens, specifically in the Mission District. But because it's such a cool place, a lot of people want to be there. A lot of people from the tech industry really happen to like our neighborhood, and our newer neighbors have the unintended consequence of raising property values, and which can sound good if you're a homeowner, but it also has a gentrifying effect, right? Where slowly the people that have grown up in the Mission, that used to be one of the working class neighborhoods in the city, has become one of the most, unaffordable. We're looking at this wall. So it's a public-facing mural. The mural itself consists of different characters. Some of them are historical characters, and then some of them are kind of like local figures. Each figure, each person is has like their individual portrait. And it's almost like you took photos of different people, and then you took those photos and you kind of spread them out on a table like a deck of cards, like a deck of photos of different folks. And so you have Frida Kahlo somewhere, you have Cesar Chavez, you have Nelson Mandela. But then you also have like all these local folks. You have like a trio of mariachis that used to play in the Bay Area, in the 60s and 70s. And you have people that started institutions in the Mission with all these figures. And there's a line of Aztec dancers, danzantes, and one of them has a group of feathers in his hand, like a bouquet almost, or a fan made of feathers. And he's touching, kind of caressing the wall with these feathers, specifically on the part of the wall that displays Frida Kahlo's face. So it's kind of like he's giving her a soft caress on the cheek. And what's happening here is that the community is saying goodbye to this mural. This mural has existed since 1985. So this was the goodbye ceremony for the community. So it was very public, very open to the community. This is actually, you're looking at the corner of 24th and York Street, and 24th Street happens to be a major artery in the Latino Cultural District. In fact, it's called Calle 24, Latino Cultural District, because so much of it is concentrated on this street. So this is just off of 24th. And if you were to keep going, if you look at the frame to the left side, and if you were to keep going that way, you'll see the front of Bravo Theater, one of the institutions that actually received one of these cutouts. Bravo Theater had a big hand in facilitating and hosting this ceremony. And so you had a lot of Aztec dancers, more than the ones we're seeing in the frame here. Aztec dancers are so magnetic. If you're walking around the street and you can hear drums and you hear shells that they wear on their feet, and you can see it in the photo, they're all wearing them. So every time they take a step, you hear and so everywhere they go, you just kind of turn your head to see what is that, and you kind of start like feeling the rhythm, So when you're standing and witnessing Aztec dancing going on, at least for me, it's really hard not to kind of like want to move my body. Like my body wants to follow the rhythm of the drums and the rhythm of the sounds that they make when they move. There's the regalia and all the traditional feathers and shields and all these items that have a significance. And I don't have that kind of deep knowledge and understanding, but I know that there's distinctions and roles that people play. There's different roles for different people and what they bring to their danzante group. And so all of that is expressed through the colors that they wear, through the sizes of the feathers, all those things. A lot of youth and people of all ages, because you have the OGs, that were young when this mural first came about, and the folks that and the artists that were already OGs when this mural was made a few decades ago. So they're the super duper OGs. And then all the children, that have come through and Aztec dancers, really young Aztec dancers. So it was actually a beautiful gathering, but, it was a difficult and sad reason for people to be gathering. But I think that people need, at least I feel like people in our culture, we need some kind of ceremony sometimes to mark these moments, and especially the difficult ones. This particular story around this building and this mural kind of told a lot about the history of the mission. The business itself that, was housed behind this wall itself struggled, and how this business owner had to pivot, go from a laundromat, which is not a viable business anymore, to condos, market rate condos, which seems to be the one way that some folks and business owners are able to survive. People become attached to this mural and everything that it represents, and all the people that grown up around this area and the almost 40 years, to have something that's always been there your whole life kind of see it disappear. The compromise that was made was to take out the mural piece by piece. And so one of the artists, the original artist of the mural, did like a GoFundMe and raised money to be able to get some contractors with electric saws, like sawing into the wall and cutting out pieces of these portraits so that they could be preserved. For example, the portrait of Frida that we're seeing now is now housed in, I believe, in Brava Theater, which is a theater nearby that corner that focuses on women performing artists. So very appropriate. I think the cutout of Cesar Chavez was given to a nearby restaurant, beloved community restaurant called Tio Chilo's. And so all of these pieces have found different homes as a bit of a compromise. It was a very sad moment to witness. The dancer that we're seeing that's caressing Frida with the feathers, his name is Ariel Vargas, and he himself, when he was a youth in the 90s, helped retouch the mural in one of its many changes and iterations. And so he's a person that has a very particular connection, someone that really, really had close ties to the community, to the mural specifically, and who himself has felt the impact of gentrification. He's a person that grew up in the neighborhood but can no longer afford to live here. He said, I mourned the gentrification of my barrio a long time ago. having reported on it and interviewed so many people that had connections to this mural also kind of helps you see that there's certain things that are kind of inevitable, or once certain forces are in motion, like gentrification, it's hard for the regular folks to stop them, but there's things that you can do around them, and there's ways that you can react and preserve your culture as much as you can. And so I think that that's what all the people in the story were holding on to. Like, we're literally holding on to the pieces of these mural. It's just like we're, hanging on to our culture in the face of gentrification. And then a week after this photo was taken, when, contractors were actually cutting murals out of the wall, that was a very different feeling. A lot of folks that walked by when contractors were cutting out these pieces of the mural from the wall didn't know that this building was going to be demolished. So they found out as they're seeing people cut it out of the wall. And so it was like people are just going about their Saturday routine, and then they just stop on their tracks watching what's going on. ¿Qué está pasando? ¿Dónde se van a llevar este mural? ¿Qué está pasando con este edificio? ¿Por qué pasan estas cosas aquí? And the contractors have to take this role of like explaining what's going on and telling people this has been a long time coming, but we're preserving them. We're not, cutting them out as a sign of disrespect, but as with the hope to preserve them. Watching in real time people grapple with pieces of their neighborhood and their culture disappearing. So it was really real, and at first I was just going to photograph these, but the more I talked to folks, I felt like the full story of this mural really had to be told. I guess it's another way of trying to hold on to something while we still have it. This picture was taken in 2020 as people are wearing masks. It was that very surreal year. So people are dealing with the pandemic, people are dealing with loss, a lot of loss, and, financial, health-wise, family-wise. And so this was another instance of loss, really. As we remember from earlier in the pandemic, when people would die, you could not go to the funeral. There was so many Zoom remote funerals. So people couldn't even have a mourning process and share that mourning process with the support of your community. So I feel like a lot of other things were expressed on this day that was bigger than just we're losing this mural, but it was kind of like we're losing a lot right now. "2020 was a year of a lot of rethinking in our society, right? George Floyd was a big catalyst, and he paid with his life. There was a lot of learning, and I think a lot of eyes opening in 2020. And it was also the year of questioning ourselves. What are these historical figures that we admire, right? And a lot of monuments to racist colonizers came down in San Francisco. Statue of Columbus came down, and other monuments really representing oppression of indigenous peoples. And so during this wave of considering what are we actually putting on pedestals, that statue was taken down, but there wasn't a lot of notice. There wasn't a ceremony. Like the statue was there one day and then not. And this activist, I remember she was saying to me, like, as much as we were happy that this thing is gone, it would have been good to let us know so that we can gather and we can have our process. This was something that when this mural came down, at least people were able to have that process. It's interesting how these kind of ceremonies really help us cope and, make sense and be able to process and heal. And if we can't process, we can't heal.
A reminder that you can see the image that Mabel has just discussed by clicking on the link in the show notes and on our website, ourlatinalens.com. In the show notes, you will also find a link to the article that Mabel wrote on the community mural for El Tecolote, the mission's bilingual community paper where she worked as a photo editor for 10 years. Next, Mabel shares about her experience reporting at the southern border at Friendship Park, a binational park at the edge of San Diego and Tijuana and the Pacific Ocean. According to friendshippark.org, on their history page, it says, in 1971, the surrounding area in the United States was inaugurated by First Lady Pat Nixon as California's Border Field State Park. On that occasion, Mrs. Nixon declared, "I hope there won't be a fence too long here," and then asked her security detail to cut the barbed wire on the border so she could step into Mexico and greet an adoring crowd. She also announced the intention of the governments of both nations to create International Friendship Park, modeled after the many such parks on the U.S.-Canada border. That dream is still alive for many people, but the reality has become much different. Listen as Mabel takes us behind the scenes of her image capturing a pinky kiss at the border. Please note that this reflection does describe families who have been separated.
And I also spent a lot of time just at the border fence itself and seeing how people on both sides of the border interact with this horrible architectural feature of Tijuana and San Diego. This photo in particular, you can see a blue metal grid that's starting to rust. And as part of this metal grid, there's like this, I guess you could call it a mesh, where the spaces in between this mesh, this metal fence, are only big enough to put your fingers through them. They're really restrictive. And this happens to be at a very specific place along the U.S. Mexico border. It's all the way to the west end of the border line. And so this is the part where the border actually goes into the ocean, the border fence. And there's a little park right there on the beach called Friendship Park. And it's a very special place because Friendship Park, half of it sits in the U.S. side of the border and the other half on the Mexican side in Tijuana. And so the border wall kind of crosses through that park. And it's supposed to be a place of gathering. For many years now, it's been a place where people on both sides of the border meet. For example, if I'm a person in Mexico and I have relatives in the United States and they're not able to leave and I'm not able to go on their side either, then people kind of meet on opposite sides of the fence. And it used to be that there was enough space in between these border fence beams. There was enough space to stick your arms through. And you could actually hug somebody on the other side of the border. And as the border has become more and more militarized, this area and the amount of contact that people can have with each other has been more and more and more restrictive to where we see it now in this photo. There's no way to fit your arms and to hug or shake someone's hand or even pass a letter through to the other side. The only thing that fits is your finger, and not even any finger, your pinky finger, your smallest finger. And so now the people that gather on both sides of the border, the only physical contact that is possible is to touch each other's pinky fingers. And there's even a term that the locals have for this type of physical contact, which is a pinky kiss. Most of the frame is filled with the grid of this border fence. It's painted blue, but you can see rust coming through. And you see one person in the foreground. You can see a woman's head wearing a beanie and her nails, very nicely made, done, white nails, touching someone else on the other side of the border. And we can't see the other person's face because of this such a restrictive grid. And you can see, though, that from the other side, another pinky finger with another beautifully styled nail is poking through. This happens on weekends, usually. It's the only times that Friendship Park, at least the U.S. side of Friendship Park, is open, is Saturdays and Sundays, I think from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So it's a very, very limited window of time that people have to see each other. So this was, I want to say, early March, really pleasant weather. Tijuana is really warm, a nice sun shining. There's also a church service, a binational, bilingual church service this also goes on.
Your love to all. Juntos, ayúdanos a orar, a predicar y a bendecir su amor para todos. Forever and ever. Por siempre de los siempre.
Right before Friendship Park is opened up, where you have a priest that's on the U.S. side giving a sermon in English, and then there's an interpreter standing on the Mexican side with a microphone. And so the priest will say, a couple sentences in English, and then the other person translates it to Spanish. And the whole sermon is that way.
We see that they need to run away for their lives.
Vemos que tienen que huir por su vida.
King Herod was the king back then.
El rey Herodes era el rey en ese entonces.
And he, if Jesus had stayed there, would kill baby Jesus.
Y si Jesús hubiera quedado, el rey hubiera matado a la criatura Jesús.
I'm not a religious person at all, like the least religious person, but something about hearing this sermon, and it was about how Jesus was a refugee. And I think that was the name of his sermon. And he talks about how, if this is part of your set of beliefs, it talks about how Jesus as a young baby, he was being chased and trying to be murdered, and his parents, Mary and Joseph, had to move, and describing that experience of having to flee the place where you're from.
Along with his parents, Jesus was someone who had to seek asylum.
Jesús, igual que sus padres, era una persona que tuvo que solicitar asilo.
Some of us here today might be refugees.
Algunos de nosotros que estamos presentes podríamos ser refugiados buscando asilo.
Some of us here today might be far from home.
Algunos estaremos lejos de nuestra casa.
Some of us today might be seeking asylum.
Algunos posiblemente estemos buscando asilo.
And we see in this story that Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, they did it too.
Y vemos en la historia que Jesús, María y José también estuvieron buscando asilo.
And there's just such a rejection in this country for refugees, especially if they happen to be Black or brown, and they are so often made to feel unwanted. And for this priest to basically tell them, you are sacred too, and what you're going through is a sacred journey as well.
We know that he can see that, and he's been through it before.
Él lo puede ver porque él lo ha sentido en carne propia también.
He understands what it means to be on the run.
Él entiende lo que es tener que huir.
He understands what it means to be far from home.
Él entiende lo que es estar lejos de casa.
He understands what it means to have his life in danger.
Él entiende lo que es temer por su vida.
It was just really touching, and I was nervous that I was photographing people's personal moments, even though they're out in the public view. I just had to be careful in how I approached it. Most people didn't really even turn back to look at me because they're so focused on their loved one that they don't want to waste a second in really dealing with me.
So as you come to the fence, find someone across the fence and give them a pinky hug.
Así es que conforme se acercan al muro, busquen a alguien del otro lado del muro y denle un beso de meñique con la puntita del dedo.
And once you've done that, place your hands on the fence.
Y después pongan sus manos sobre el muro.
And when I was there, this happens to be a very kind of touristy part too of Tijuana. There's a beach right there. So there's food vendors, at least on the Tijuana side. There's very different realities on each side of the border. In the Mexican side, you have food vendors, you have musicians playing songs, you have all kinds of activity, families walking around the pier, taking photos, frolicking on the beach, dogs, all that kind of life that one would expect at a nice beach. But on the song that was being played was very specific to missing someone, and the lyrics are about like if you could only see how much I miss you, and how much I remember you, and I can only hope you remember me the same.
Si
really hard to take photos because I think of all the documentation and sites I visited at the border. This was probably the hardest one because you really see that separation play out in real time. I saw this man who I could see was meeting with a young boy and a woman on the other side, on the U.S. side. And so I got the sense that maybe this was a father on the Mexico side, and that his son and his son's mom lived on the US side. And so I just saw him play with this action figure, and they couldn't even pass the action figures to actually really play with each other. They could just sort of push it up against the fence and show it to each other. And that was really hard to witness. I also met a couple. They had kind of a complicated immigration story where they came to the U.S. Without documents back in the 90s. Then they grow older and they had kids, and now their kids are adults and have their own children. And at one point, the father, as a patriot mom in Mexico City, became so ill that he had to make this tough decision that as an undocumented person, if you leave the States, it's not a guarantee that you're going to be able to make it back in. And so this man couldn't see his mom die alone in Mexico City. So he left the US and about 10 years ago and has not been able to re-enter. And so all of his grown kids and grandkids are in California. And he's in Mexico City and he travels to the border. And so when I met this person, he was taking photos. He was like sticking his phone right up on the border fence and just trying to line up that lens of the camera on the cell phone with one of those tiny little holes where a pinky barely fits, so that he could get a picture of his grandkids who he was meeting for the first time. So watching this grandfather meet his grandkids for the first time and not be able to hug them and hold them was just it's just kind of one of those things that honestly, like, it kind of broke me in that moment. It was like I had to fight tears, honestly, like through taking photos and like wiping my eyes so that I could see what I was photographing, because this was really hard. Take that story of that man meeting his grandkids, and you take that story of that father trying to play with his son on the other side and multiply that. And it was so many people with similar stories, people that lost contact with family members, and they just go to the border every week with the hope that maybe their loved one will also have the same idea. I think people want the rest of the world to know what's happening here, because it's this is the only physical contact that's possible anymore. So this kind of really tells you this is all you get. It's important to me now, even 3 years later, because now the Biden administration has confirmed that they plan to close Friendship Park. So even this little bit of physical contact, such as the pinky kiss, is not going to be possible anymore. You're not even going to be able to see or talk to people on the other side. It's going to be completely sealed off. And so as hard as it was standing there and watching people kind of hold on to these sort of crumbs of contact that are available there, now it's going to be even more restricted. So now that even won't be possible. So that's why I really wanted to bring that up, because it feels that while we had Trump as president, it was really easy to be alarmed and to feel the urgency of the moment. And because Biden is not so openly awful, it's kind of, there's a complacency now where we're allowing all this stuff to continue. I really wanted to take this opportunity to bring this up again, because Friendship Park is going to be closed, or, hopefully something will happen between now and whenever that's supposed to be completed. Hopefully that will not be the case. It was kind of hard to get a pinky kiss, because I'm trying to get visually very close without actually getting physically too close and interrupting those moments. But something about this one, like without necessarily showing a person's face and maybe, raising any privacy issues, it's still just by seeing the garments, the hair, the styled nails, the ring, it feels like it gives me a feeling for who this person might be. And I kind of relate to her, even though I can't see her face. And I can't see the face of the person standing in front of her that's actually facing the camera because of this border wall. And it's just that moment, just that moment of contact, right? It's not before, it's not after. It's just that very quick touch. And I think there's a lot of different stories that one could imagine here. And even if the story that one imagines doesn't fit this particular, what was going on in this frame, I think there's thousands of stories that happen right in this spot on both sides of the fence. And so I think it allows for a lot of understanding of what a moment like that might feel like.
It is such an honor to hold the experience and stories like Mabel's, and I look forward to sharing more stories from more diverse Latina and Latine photographers across genres, locations, heritages, and life experiences. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter at our website. This is a new project, and 3 quick and free ways you can support us is to rate and review us on Apple or Spotify, share this episode with your family and friends, and follow us on social media at Our Latina Lens. Images discussed today and show notes are available at our website, ourlatinalens.com. Gracias for listening. Today's show was recorded, produced, and edited by me, Mónica Aldarondo. Images were taken by Mabel Jiménez, and the recordings that you heard at the border were also created by Mabel Jiménez. Our podcast art was created by Tumpa Mystery, and our theme song created by Matthias Mueller. L'Ancla Creative.